processions with wild eagerness, others fled timidly, some wept aloud. Adrian's chief endeavour, after the immediate succour of the sick, had been to disguise the symptoms and progress of the plague from the inhabitants of London. He knew that fear and melancholy forebodings were powerful assistants to disease, that desponding and brooding care rendered the physical nature of man peculiarly susceptible of infection. No unseemly sights were therefore discernible, the shops were in general open, the concourse of passengers in some degree kept up; but although the appearance of an infected town was avoided, to me, who had not beheld it since the commencement of the visitation, London appeared sufficiently changed. There were no carriages, and grass had sprung high in the streets; the houses had a desolate look, most of the shutters were closed, and there was a ghast and frightened stare in the persons I met, very different from the usual business-like demeanour of the Londoners. My solitary carriage attracted notice as it rattled along towards the Protectoral Palace, and the fashionable streets leading to it wore a still more dreary and deserted appearance. I found Adrian's antechamber crowded; it was his hour for giving audience. I was unwilling to disturb his labours, and waited, watching the ingress and egress of the petitioners. They consisted of people of the middling and lower classes of society, whose means of subsistence failed with the cessation of trade, and of the busy spirit of money-making, in all its branches, peculiar to our country. There was an air of anxiety, sometimes of terror, in the newcomers, strongly contrasted with the resigned and even satisfied mien of those who had had audience. I could read the influence of my friend in their quickened motions and cheerful faces. 2 o'clock struck, after which none were admitted; those who had been disappointed went sullenly or sorrowfully away, while I entered the audience chamber. I was struck by the improvement that appeared in the health of Adrian. He was no longer bent to the ground, like an over-nursed flower of spring, that, shooting up beyond its strength, is weighed down even by its own coronal of blossoms. His eyes were bright, his countenance composed; an air of concentrated energy was diffused over his whole person, much unlike its former languor. He sat at a table with several secretaries, who were arranging petitions, or registering the notes made during that day's audience. 2 or 3 petitioners were still in attendance. I admired his justice and patience. Those who possessed a power of living out of London, he advised immediately to quit it, affording them the means of so doing. Others, whose trade was beneficial to the city, or who possessed no other refuge, he provided with advice for better avoiding the epidemic, relieving overloaded families, supplying the gaps made in others by death. Order, comfort, and even health rose under his influence, as from the touch of a magician's wand. "I am glad you are come," he said to me, when we were at last alone. "I can only spare a few minutes, and must tell you much in that time. The plague is now in progress; it is useless closing one's eyes to the fact; the deaths increase each week. What will come, I cannot guess. As yet, thank God, I am equal to the government of the town, and I look only to the present. Ryland, whom I have so long detained, has stipulated that I shall suffer him to depart before the end of this month. The deputy appointed by Parliament is dead; another therefore must be named. I have advanced my claim, and I believe that I shall have no competitor. To-night the question is to be decided, as there is a call of the House for the purpose. You must nominate me, Lionel. Ryland, for shame, cannot show himself; but you, my friend, will do me this service?" How lovely is devotion! Here was a youth, royally sprung, bred in luxury, by nature averse to the usual struggles of a public life, and now, in time of danger, at a period when to live was the utmost scope of the ambitious, he, the beloved and heroic Adrian, made, in sweet simplicity, an offer to sacrifice himself for the public good. The very idea was generous and noble; but, beyond this, his unpretending manner, his entire want of the assumption of a virtue, rendered his act 10 times more touching. I would have withstood his request, but I had seen the good he diffused. I felt that his resolves were not to be shaken, so, with a heavy heart, I consented to do as he asked. He grasped my hand affectionately. "Thank you," he said, "you have relieved me from a painful dilemma, and are, as you ever were, the best of my friends. Farewell, I must now leave you for a few hours. Go you and converse with Ryland. Although he deserts his post in London, he may be of the greatest service in the north of England, by receiving and assisting travellers, and contributing to supply the metropolis with food. Awaken him, I entreat you, to some sense of duty." Adrian left me, as I afterwards learnt, upon his daily task of visiting the hospitals, and inspecting the crowded parts of London. I found Ryland much altered, even from what he had been when he visited Windsor. Perpetual fear had jaundiced his complexion, and shrivelled his whole person. I told him of the business of the evening, and a smile relaxed the contracted muscles. He desired to go; each day he expected to be infected by pestilence; each day he was unable to resist the gentle violence of Adrian's detention. The moment Adrian should be legally elected his deputy, he would escape to safety. Under this impression he listened to all I said, and, elevated almost to joy by the near prospect of his departure, he entered into a discussion concerning the plans he should adopt in his own county, forgetting, for the moment, his cherished resolution of shutting himself up from all communication in the mansion and grounds of his estate. In the evening, Adrian and I proceeded to Westminster. As we went, he reminded me of what I was to say and do, yet, strange to say, I entered the chamber without having once reflected on my purpose. Adrian remained in the coffee room, while I, in compliance with his desire, took my seat in St. Stephen's. There reigned unusual silence in the chamber. I had not visited it since Raymond's protectorate, a period conspicuous for a numerous attendance of members, for the eloquence of the speakers, and the warmth of the debate. The benches were very empty. Those by custom occupied by the hereditary members were vacant. The city members were there, the members for the commercial towns, few landed proprietors, and not many of those who entered Parliament for the sake of a career. The first subject that occupied the attention of the House was an address from the Lord Protector, praying them to appoint a deputy during a necessary absence on his part. A silence prevailed, till one of the members coming to me, whispered that the Earl of Windsor had sent him word that I was to move his election, in the absence of the person who had been first chosen for this office. Now for the first time I saw the full extent of my task, and I was overwhelmed by what I had brought on myself. Ryland had deserted his post through fear of the plague; from the same fear Adrian had no competitor. And I, the nearest kinsman of the Earl of Windsor, was to propose his election. I was to thrust this selected and matchless friend into the post of danger. Impossible! The die was cast. I would offer myself as candidate. The few members who were present had come more for the sake of terminating the business by securing a legal attendance, than under the idea of a debate. I had risen mechanically, my knees trembled. Irresolution hung on my voice as I uttered a few words on the necessity of choosing a person adequate to the dangerous task in hand. But when the idea of presenting myself in the room of my friend intruded, the load of doubt and pain was taken from off me. My words flowed spontaneously, my utterance was firm and quick. I adverted to what Adrian had already done. I promised the same vigilance in furthering all his views. I drew a touching picture of his vacillating health. I boasted of my own strength. I prayed them to save even from himself this scion of the noblest family in England. My alliance with him was the pledge of my sincerity. My union with his sister, my children, his presumptive heirs, were the hostages of my truth. This unexpected turn in the debate was quickly communicated to Adrian. He hurried in, and witnessed the termination of my impassioned harangue. I did not see him, my soul was in my words, my eyes could not perceive that which was, while a vision of Adrian's form, tainted by pestilence, and sinking in death, floated before them. He seized my hand as I concluded. "Unkind!" he cried, "you have betrayed me." Then springing forwards with the air of one who had a right to command, he claimed the place of deputy as his own. He had bought it, he said, with danger, and paid for it with toil. His ambition rested there, and after an interval devoted to the interests of his country, was I to step in and reap the profit? Let them remember what London had been when he arrived. The panic that prevailed brought famine, while every moral and legal tie was loosened. He had restored order. This had been a work which required perseverance, patience, and energy, and he had neither slept nor waked but for the good of his country. Would they dare wrong him thus? Would they wrest his hard-earned reward for him, to bestow it on one who, never having mingled in public life, would come a tyro to the craft in which he was an adept? He demanded the place of deputy as his right. Ryland had shown that he preferred him. Never before had he, who was born even to the inheritance of the throne of England, never had he asked favour or honour from those now his equals, but who might have been his subjects. Would they refuse him? Could they thrust back from the path of distinction and laudable ambition the heir of their ancient kings, and heap another disappointment on a fallen house? No one had ever before heard Adrian allude to the rights of his ancestors. None had ever before suspected that power or the suffrage of the many could in any manner become dear to him. He had begun his speech with vehemence. He ended with unassuming gentleness, making his appeal with the same humility as if he had asked to be the first in wealth, honour, and power among Englishmen, and not, as was the truth, to be the foremost in the ranks of loathsome toils and inevitable death. A murmur of approbation rose after his speech. "Oh, do not listen to him," I cried. "He speaks false, false to himself." I was interrupted, and silence being restored, we were ordered, as was the custom, to retire during the decision of the House. I fancied that they hesitated, and that there was some hope for me. I was mistaken. Hardly had we quitted the chamber before Adrian was recalled and installed in his office of Lord Deputy to the Protector. We returned together to the palace. "Why, Lionel," said Adrian, "what did you intend? You could not hope to conquer, and yet you gave me the pain of a triumph over my dearest friend." "This is mockery," I replied. "You devote yourself, you, the adored brother of Idris, the being of all the world contains dearest to our hearts, you devote yourself to an early death. I would have prevented this. My death would be a small evil, or rather I should not die, while you cannot hope to escape." "As to the likelihood of escaping," said Adrian, 10 years hence the cold stars may shine on the graves of all of us; but as to my peculiar liability to infection, I can easily prove, both logically and physically, that in the midst of contagion I have a better chance of life than you. This is my post. I was born for this, to rule England in anarchy, to save her in danger, to devote myself for her. The blood of my forefathers cries aloud in my veins, and bids me be first among my countrymen. Or if this mode of speech offend you, let me say that my mother, the proud queen, instilled early into me a love of distinction, and all that, if the weakness of my physical nature and my peculiar opinions had not prevented such a design, might have made me long since struggle for the lost inheritance of my race. But now my mother, or, if you will, my mother's lessons awaken within me. I cannot lead on to battle. I cannot, through intrigue and faithlessness, rear again the throne upon the wreck of English public spirit; but I can be the first to support and guard